Well, wisdom. Wisdom may stem from a dad's favorite sayings. Go ask your mother. Or just wait till I get home. When I was your age, here's a good one. I used to walk to school in the snow, up hills both ways. And lastly, I'm busy right now. For some, people may look elsewhere for wisdom. I want you to consider these words that have been shared. The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. From Albert Einstein. A man never stands as tall as when he kneels to help a child. From the Knights of Pythagoras. A child identifies his parents with God, whether the adults want that role or not. Most people see God the way they perceive their earthly fathers. From James Dobson. And for the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Proverbs 2, verse 6. Wisdom, what is wisdom? What does it mean to be wise? Well, there are some guys who are wise, and there are other guys who are wise guys. There are some who impart wisdom beyond their years, yet there are others who take advantage of others for years. There are some who move in one direction, while others, they move in a totally and completely indifferent and opposite direction. In this series Tim's been on James, we're going to continue with that in James chapter 3. If you want to turn there, if you want to take some notes, now's a good time to go there. But James chapter 3, verse 13 says this, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." James begins by asking this question, who is wise and understanding among you? You see, the early believers understood that true wisdom comes from God. And in the early church, the believers were instructed to walk in this wisdom. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 says this, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." You see, James reiterates the fact that followers of Jesus must be walking towards God's wisdom. And earlier in his letter, James pointed out that faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Therefore, a follower of Jesus should not only be walking towards God's wisdom, but also applying it and living it out each day of their lives. And in order to live as a follower of Jesus, one needs to come into contact with this wisdom that comes from God. Now, James provides some practical guidance, wisdom to move in the right direction in life. One of the early lessons in driving an automobile is what? The automobile stays on the right side of the road in the right-hand lane. Well, why do we do that? Well, you don't want to drive into oncoming traffic and to cause an accident. Now, I haven't driven in another country, but, for us here in America, we drive on this right side of the road. On this two-way street, we are either moving in one of two directions. Wisdom is kind of similar to that of a road. You see, wisdom is a two-way street. Wisdom is a two-way street. And let me explain what that means. First of all, you'll notice that there are two paths, two directions. The first direction is that of earthly bound wisdom. Earthly bound wisdom. Look there at James chapter 3, verse 14. "But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." See, James begins with describing this one particular direction of wisdom, that being the earthly bound wisdom. You see, earthly bound wisdom is about the self, about what is in it for me. Therefore, James goes on to describe some mile markers, if you will, that you'll notice along the way, especially if someone is moving in this direction of earthly bound wisdom. There are some things that are noticed. You know, when you're driving down the road, the markers there from distance from point A to point B shows you where you're moving. Well, in a sense, there are a couple mile markers that we'll notice here. There is the mile marker envy. Mile marker envy. You know, envy comes from this word zelos, which we get the word zeal or jealousy, and it's defined as the active and aggression to diminish the good in another, especially through petty complaining and fault finding. Now, zeal can be very positive because it's very focused, but in this particular sense, it's not. It's very negative. It's jealousy. You know, James was concerned about the believers who would continue to complain about their customs and practices and how they wanted things done their way. And like, no, this is what we need to be about. This petty arguing over who did what would bring, this bad name to Christians. And so James describes that those who participate in this kind of activity, this kind of fault finding, this kind of pointing blame, this petty arguing, this is not from God. This is of the devil. It is of the devil because envy keeps you from choosing to follow God. Now you can see the picture here. You or someone you may know begin to spread a false rumor about somebody else. They make these negative comments and then they try to paint this picture to make the other person look bad because perhaps they're jealous of their position or of their recognition. There's this stark rivalry that exists. Think of the athlete who complains about his team is not good enough and they want to become part of the winning team. And this isn't just for adults. This happens to children as well. They're maybe playing a game or out on the playground and they're being picked and it's like, no, I want to be on that team. This is where I want to be. I want to be over here. It takes place everywhere. And we become envious of what others may have, of where they've been or perhaps where they're going. Paul was not a stranger to envy. As Paul and Barnabas arrived there in Antioch and they began teaching about Jesus, the Jewish crowds there, they saw them and they saw the people that were gathering to listen to Paul and Barnabas, and then they became jealous of what was taking place as they talked about Jesus. And as Paul and Barnabas continued to live among the people and to teach them about who this Jesus is, the Jewish people just stirred up this dissension, this persecution against Paul and Barnabas. They made so many accusations and so many things that eventually they were expelled from the region. So it's not a new thing. And then there's this mile marker, the mile marker of selfish ambition. Selfish ambition. Selfish ambition is about putting one's own interests above others. It's considering how can others help me get what I want. It is really self-seeking. Take this for an example that Aristotle denotes selfish ambition as a self-seeking pursuit of political office by unfair means. People and governments, they lobby and they position themselves in order to serve their own interests. This is nothing new. This has been going on for centuries and for hundreds of years. People go after what they want without thought of how in this pursuit, how this may affect people in this whole process. And so this type of person is full of selfish ambition. And so James continues to describe that those that are moving in this direction of this earthly bound wisdom, they are after the successes of this world. And in verse 16, James says that with envy and selfish ambition come disorder in this evil practice. There is confusion and actions done with evil intent. And this path, it leaves this trail of destruction. And James reminds us that earthly bound wisdom is contrary to God's. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20 says, "Where is the wise man? Where is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world?" And so James warns us not to travel in this direction of this earthly bound wisdom. He warns us not to go that route. Perhaps you're familiar with the story in Greek mythology about a young man named Narcissus. He was a beautiful young man, and, well, he knew it. And one day when Narcissus saw his reflection in a stream, he instantly fell in love with this image, this reflected image that he saw of himself. He just fell in love with it. And so he started looking at this image, and back and forth, day after day, he kept going back to this, and he couldn't pull himself away from this image. So day after day after day, and night after night after night, he continued to look at this image of himself that he was falling so in love and mesmerized with. So he continued to look at it. He just gazed, and he was trapped in his own ego. And it says and rumored that he eventually turned into the narcissus flower left to bloom at the water's edge. Now, when we continue in the direction of earthly bound wisdom, we may find ourselves staring at our own reflection. However, to think there is another direction that we can take. Not just this earthly bound wisdom, because wisdom is a two-way street. There is another direction, another path in which we can take, and that is that of the earthly bound wisdom. The earthly bound. Once we go that way, there is the heavenly bound wisdom. Look there in James 3:17. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. You see, James mentions the two kinds of wisdoms here. There's the earthly bound wisdom, and then there's this heavenly bound wisdom, this heavenly bound. This heavenly bound wisdom is about seeking to live a life that is reflective of God and not of the self. Heavenly bound wisdom, it comes from God. You know, James previously mentioned in his letter there in chapter 1, verse 17, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. You know, as someone moves in this direction of this heavenly bound wisdom, these mile markers begin to emerge themselves. They're there, and it's not necessarily that they happen in a sequential order, but they're there to help identify those that are on this path, this direction of this heavenly bound wisdom. And there are some things that we can notice here regarding heavenly bound wisdom, and it's that mile marker, first of all, of pure. Mile marker, pure. You know, pure is being free from every fault. And first of all, God's words are pure. Psalm 12, verse 6 says, "And the words of the Lord are flawless, like silver refined in a furnace of clay, purified 7 times." And second, we notice that we are purified through Jesus. 1 John 1, verse 7 says, "But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, purifies us from all sin." You see, in order for us to begin moving away from the earthly bound wisdom in the path, in order to move into the direction of the heavenly bound wisdom, we need to make a decision, and that's where Jesus comes in, a decision to accept and to believe that Jesus is the Son of the living God. We confess him as our Lord and Savior, and we are immersed, we are baptized into Christ, because we want to turn our path. Instead of having this earthly bound wisdom, we want to turn away and work towards this heavenly bound wisdom, and it's through Jesus. You see, you can't be a follower of God without obeying his word. And James makes it abundantly clear that a follower of Jesus has this new identity in Christ. He's the one that can help us through this. And that brings us to this mile marker. Mile marker, peace-loving. Mile marker, peace-loving. Now, the Greek word here for peace-loving is only used once in the Bible in the New Testament, one of which is here in this passage. It is peace that comes from correction. You know, don't we just love to be corrected? Don't we just love that? Well, you know, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11 says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. As difficult as it may seem for the one giving the discipline and the one receiving the discipline, it brings a peace knowing that perhaps a greater problem, a greater tragedy has been averted. And peace-loving may involve some hard decisions and even some difficult discussions. In a sense, your peace-loving functions as this mode of accountability. You see, as someone may have said, I want to make this decision, and I've been heading on this earthly bound wisdom path, and I want to make this directional change and start moving towards this heavenly bound wisdom, but yet I start to wrestle with some decisions and I'm starting to turn around. This peace loving comes into play to help perhaps this person to counteract and to hold them accountable so they don't start turning around and heading the opposite direction. It helps us stay the course when we want to turn around and head the other way. It becomes very important and beneficial. And then there is this mile marker of considerate. Mile marker considerate. The word used here for considerate is often translated as gentle. And this means to be fair and equitable. Philippians chapter 4, verse 5 says, "Let your gentleness be evident to all." You see, we're to be considerate. We are to be gentle to all. And James reminds us to be considerate among non-believers as well as believers, as this is a mark of our faith. You see, we are putting our faith in action. This is where the rubber meets the road. We're willing to converse, to understand people who may be a non-believer as well as a believer. We want to be able to interact with them. It's a great opportunity to reach out to people and to let them know of our faith and to be able to encourage them. We want to be gentle and considerate of them, being able to converse and to interact. So it's important that we can be considerate and gentle. And then there is the mile marker submissive. Mile marker submissive. This is the only time this particular word is used. And submissive here is to easily obey. It is to easily obey. And James reminds us that we should submit to true teaching and to listen carefully to opinions instead of attacking. You see, heavenly bound wisdom is unchanging. Romans 14 says this, "Accept him whose faith is weak, without passing judgment on disputable matters." And James encourages us to be firmly rooted and focused on following Christ. However, we should not be quick to judge someone who is starting to move in this direction of heavenly bound wisdom. Someone that may have been heading this earthly bound direction has made this choice, and now they're heading heavenly bound, and someone else may be a little bit further down the road. They can be there to help them, to support them, and to encourage them as they travel along this path in this direction as well. A great way to show some support. A great time that we can be there for them. But then there is the mile marker mercy. Mile marker mercy. The implication of mercy in this verse is how people show mercy to other people. How people show mercy to other people. Again, you've heard someone once said that mercy is when we don't get what we deserve. Now, God shows us mercy through Jesus so that we can have a relationship with him instead of receiving what we do deserve, and that is separation from him. And if God shows us mercy, then shouldn't we show mercy to others? And as we move in this direction of this heavenly bound wisdom, do we show mercy? Do we show goodwill? Do we show kindness to those who are perhaps miserable and afflicted? James mentions earlier that mercy triumphs over judgment. And when we practice mercy, we implement the teachings of Jesus. Luke chapter 6, verse 36 says, "Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." So we shouldn't pass up an opportunity to show mercy to another person. And perhaps you recall, this is a great time, a great week to be involved with this food drive and thinking about an opportunity to show mercy to someone else, to someone in need, and in ways that you can perhaps help out with some items and feeding students that are not in school this summer. Just a way to show mercy, a little compassion to another human. Another great way to show mercy. And then there's mile marker impartial. Mile marker impartial. You know, another word for impartial here is unwavering. You know, in other words, it is without uncertainty. To be moving in the heavenly bound direction, a person is fully committed. They are sold out to the cause of Christ. He's not going both directions. You can't be going to the earthly bound direction and the heavenly bound direction at the same time. It's being focused and committed to Christ, to live like Christ and to love like Christ. Romans 12 verse 9 says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. And so James continues with the importance of faith and actions, as he said earlier in chapter 2, verse 18, but someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. And so we continue to be sincere and impartial. You know, some of you may know and heard of Ravi Zacharias. Well, it's told that he was attending this lectureship several years ago at the Ohio State University, and as he was being driven to this lecture hall, they passed what was known as the Wexner Art Center. And so the driver commented to Ravi that he said, this is a new art building for the university. It is a fascinating building designed in the postmodernist view of reality. Well, Ravi described this fascinating building. He said this. He said, the building has no pattern. Staircases go nowhere. Pillars support nothing. The architect designed the building to reflect this postmodernist view of life. It went nowhere and was mindless and senseless. Well, Ravi said, I turned to the man describing it and asked him this question. Did they do the same thing with the foundation? Well, the man laughed and he answered, you can't do that with the foundation. And you know, Jesus says that the person who builds on the firm foundation is wise. Proverbs 4 verse 7 says, wisdom is supreme, therefore get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. And in Proverbs chapter 9 verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. See, wisdom is a two-way street. There's the earthly bound wisdom in this direction and the heavenly bound wisdom in this direction. It's a two-way street. And we're either heading in one of two directions. We're either heading in the earthly bound wisdom direction, or we are heading in the heavenly bound wisdom direction. And as we move in either of these, we perhaps notice some of these mile markers along the way that notify us of the direction that we're heading. You know, just before the outbreak of the First World War, there was a small ship named the Endurance that set sail from Britain with a crew intent on being the first to cross to the South Pole. Well, the ship reached Antarctica but became icebound in the Weddell Sea. Soon they had to abandon their ship, and this 28-man crew took to their lifeboats. They were trapped on the ice for over a year. A desperate decision was made to take 4 men in a 20-foot lifeboat across the roughest sea in the world to a whaling station on the South Georgia island some 800 miles away. At the helm was a man named Worsley. All he had to guide them that 800 miles to this South Georgia island was a map, a watch, a sextant, and a compass. But it was all he needed if he used them well. You see, a mistake as minor as being off by only 1 degree would have proved disastrous. And so these 4 men in the boat endured seas that raged waves higher than a 10-story building. They were constantly cold and wet from the waves that just constantly drenched the boat. They had the most meager of rations. And the journey didn't take just a day or two. It took about 2 weeks. But Worsley, whose most sophisticated tool was a compass, managed to get that lifeboat the 800 miles to this South Georgia island, and eventually the entire crew of the Endurance was saved and was rescued. And so as a result, Worsley was a hero. The whaling captains who sailed those waters considered him one of the wisest navigators in the world. Worsley was brilliant, but of all his brilliance would have been worthless if he had not used the compass. Worsley was wise because he used the compass to guide him. You see, the ancients believed that there are two types of people in the world, people who are fools and people who are wise. And being wise is a matter of using the compass you've been given to get where you need to go. And fools choose not to use the compass. And so God has provided us with His Word and a way to go through life and the decisions that we make when we have the choice of whether we are heading in the earthly bound wisdom direction or in the heavenly bound wisdom direction. And so I ask you this question: which direction are you moving? As we prepare to sing this song, this is an opportunity for you to respond, to say, you know what, I want to make that decision and say, I've perhaps been heading in this earthly bound wisdom, and I want to come to know and accept who Jesus is, because I want to turn around and start heading this way in the heavenly bound direction. This is a time for you to respond or to say, you know what, I want to be a part of the First Christian Church family and be able to help others who are moving in that direction. This is a great time for you as well. Let's go ahead and stand together, and as